It was supposed to be a simple winter getaway, mother and daughter spending time together, carving paths through the fresh powder of a peaceful mountain resort. Emma Harris, a vibrant 34-year-old single mom, had planned the trip months in advance. Her daughter Lily, just 9 at the time, was excited beyond words. It was their first time skiing together, and Emma wanted to make it special a memory that would last a lifetime. They checked into a cozy lodge nestled in the heart of the snowy wilderness, far from the chaos of city life. Locals remember seeing them laughing, sipping hot cocoa by the fire, and shopping for ski gear at the resort store. But just 3 days into their trip, something unexplainable happened. Emma and Lily vanished without a trace. At first, everyone thought they might have just taken a detour, maybe a hidden trail or a spontaneous hike. But as the hours passed and daylight faded, worry set in. The lodge staff alerted authorities when they missed dinner, and what followed was one of the most puzzling missing persons cases in the region's history. Search teams, helicopters, and trained dogs scoured the mountain slopes for days. Their rental car was still parked outside the lodge. All their belongings remained untouched in their room. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no clues. Just nothing. The snow, as if nature itself had conspired in silence, covered everything. Locals whispered theories. Some believed it was an accident that they had gotten lost in the woods and succumbed to the cold. Others feared something darker. But with no physical evidence, no final sighting, and no leads, the case slowly faded into the background. For 7 long years, the Harris family lived in painful uncertainty. Emma's parents never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. Candlelight vigils were held every winter in her hometown. Online forums buzzed with amateur sleuths trying to piece together what might have gone wrong on that cold afternoon. But time has a way of making even the most chilling mysteries fade into the quiet corners of memory till something brings them crashing back into the light. That moment came in the most unexpected way. It was a sunny afternoon in early spring, and the snow was just starting to melt across the upper ridge trails of the very same mountain range. A hiker named Daniel Brooks, an experienced outdoorsman and amateur photographer, had taken a detour off a main trail to explore a less traveled path. He was looking for rare wildflowers and untouched landscapes. But what he found instead stopped him cold. Beneath a cluster of pine trees, partially hidden by fallen branches and soft melting snow, Daniel spotted something unusual: old piece of fabric, bright red, clinging to a low branch. At first, he thought it was just some forgotten ski gear, maybe left behind by another adventurer. But as he brushed away the debris and stepped closer, he noticed something strange. The fabric was part of a child's snowsuit, weathered but unmistakable. And just a few feet away, there was more personal items, half buried, eerily preserved. It didn't take long before Daniel realized he had stumbled onto something that needed to be reported. When authorities returned to the area, the discovery quickly turned into something much more disturbing. Forensic teams began examining the site, and within days, the news made headlines again. Remains had been found. DNA testing would confirm the unthinkable. After 7 years of silence, the mystery of Emma and Lily Harris was opening up again, but what they found in that hidden grove didn't answer the questions. If anything, it raised more. What led Emma and Lily to that remote, unmarked area of the mountain, miles from any known trail? Why was no distress signal ever sent? No sign of emergency or escape. And most unsettling of all, some items found at the scene weren't listed in their luggage inventory from the resort. A child's drawing that wasn't Lily's. A rusted flashlight with a different lodge's initials. A torn map, hand-drawn with markings that didn't match official resort trails. Each detail painted a more chilling picture, suggesting they weren't alone up there. Investigators reopened the case with fresh eyes, following every new clue. The mountain, once a backdrop to a mother and daughter's joyful vacation, had become a place of grim answers and unsettling implications. Journalists from across the country began to revisit the original case, interviewing locals, reviewing overlooked footage, and re-questioning resort staff. There were people who remembered small details that didn't seem important at the time. A man in a green parka who asked strange questions at the ski rental desk. A vehicle seen near the forest road hours before the disappearance. Voice on a forgotten 911 call reporting distant screams. Dismissed at the time as a prank. But nothing, not even these new revelations, prepared anyone for what came next. In a sealed envelope mailed anonymously to the town sheriff's office, there was a photograph, old, grainy, but clear enough to send chills down the spine. In the picture were two figures standing in the snow. One of them looked exactly like Emma. The photo had no return address, no note, no date, just the image. And a timestamp that didn't match any timeline from their trip. Now, as authorities dig deeper and the public watches closely, one haunting question remains. Were Emma and Lily victims of a tragic accident, or was someone else involved all along? And if so, who left that envelope, and why now? Stay with us as we take you through the timeline, revisit the key players, and uncover the chilling twists that this story has taken since that fateful ski trip. Because sometimes the snow doesn't just cover footprints, it buries secrets. And when the ice finally melts, what comes to the surface can change everything. Emma Harris wasn't the kind of person who left things unfinished. Her friends described her as dependable, focused, the type who always showed up, especially for her daughter. Before the ski trip, she had just been promoted at her marketing job, and she'd promised Lily a celebration in the form of their first big winter vacation together. Emma planned everything down to the last detail. Flights, lodge reservations, ski lessons. She even packed Lily's favorite red snowsuit and a matching scarf they'd picked out together. So when she and her daughter disappeared without a single message or trace, everyone who knew her struggled to make sense of it. Lily, on the other hand, was full of life. She was curious, bright, always asking questions. Teachers at her school remembered her as a kid who loved art and animals, someone who could light up a room with her smile. She was close with her mom, more like best friends than just mother and daughter. Emma had raised her on her own since Lily was a baby, and their bond was incredibly strong. That's what made their vanishing all the more painful.
It wasn't.
Just to people missing it was an entire story that had been cut short with no explanation. The mountain resort where they disappeared, White Pine Ridge, wasn't exactly known for danger. In fact, it was popular with families and beginners. Known more for its quiet trails and cozy cabins than any wild terrain. Emma and Lily had arrived on a Friday afternoon, checked into cabin 6B, and were seen by several people over the next couple of days. They rented skis, took part in a group lesson, and even posed for a picture with other guests near the base lodge. That photo would later become one of the last confirmed sightings of them smiling, bundled up with the snow-covered peak rising behind them. What stood out to investigators early on was how quickly they disappeared. There was a narrow window on Sunday afternoon where no one remembered seeing them. They hadn't signed up for any lessons that day. Staff at the lodge said they weren't seen at breakfast. Some guests mentioned seeing a woman and a child walking toward the forest trail that led to a scenic lookout. But no one could say for sure it was Emma and Lily. That trail, called Raven's Pass, wasn't on most visitor maps and had been partially closed due to snowdrifts. Still, it was possible someone could have wandered onto it without realizing the risk. Search crews had focused heavily on that area during the first week. Helicopters flew over the ridge, thermal scanners scanned the terrain, and dogs were brought in. But a snowstorm rolled through 2 days after the disappearance, covering any tracks and making rescue efforts nearly impossible. Despite their best efforts, nothing was found. No belongings, no footprints, no sign of them anywhere. The mountain had swallowed them whole. The resort eventually returned to business as usual. But things were never quite the same. Employees spoke in hushed tones about the woman and the girl, and some guests claimed to feel uneasy on certain trails. A few even reported strange sounds at night, distant cries, branches snapping, or the sensation of being watched. Of course, most people chalked it up to mountain wind or overactive imaginations. But those stories didn't disappear. Years later, when Daniel Brooks made his discovery, all those buried fears returned. Daniel was no thrill seeker. He was a quiet man, a retired biology teacher who had taken up hiking and photography as a peaceful hobby. He had no idea his spring hike would take such a dark turn. When he found that red piece of fabric, he said something just didn't feel right. It wasn't just what he found, but where he found it, nearly 4 miles from the nearest marked trail. That's not the kind of place a child would end up on her own. And the scattered items nearby, the sketchbook with childlike drawings, the half-buried scarf, and an old camera with water damage only deepened the mystery. The camera was particularly important. After careful cleaning and data recovery, investigators managed to pull a few blurry images from the memory card. Most were unremarkable trees, snowy paths, blurry hands. But one photo stood out. It was taken at an odd angle, as if the person holding the camera had been in a hurry. The image showed part of a tree trunk, snow-covered ground, and the edge of what looked like a boot print larger than a child's, deeper, suggesting a heavier person. The timestamp on the file didn't match any known moments from Emma and Lily's trip. In fact, it was dated 2 days after they'd last been seen. That photo gave the investigation new energy. The idea that someone else had been with them more, had found them, opened up all kinds of disturbing possibilities. Forensic teams returned to the ridge, and while snow had long since melted, soil samples and tree bark were collected for analysis. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the findings became. A tattered map was found stuffed into a rusted tin under a tree root, containing rough, hand-drawn outlines of the mountain paths. A strange symbol like an eye was marked over one area. Investigators couldn't match the map's design to any official documents, raising questions about who had made it and why it had been hidden. Meanwhile, Emma's parents were pulled back into the nightmare they'd lived with for years. Emma's father, now in his 70s, spoke to reporters with quiet determination. He said he always believed they'd be found, one way or another. Her mother, more guarded, admitted that part of her still held on to hope that Lily had survived. Somehow, they both agreed on one thing: the truth was long overdue. As attention around the case grew again, online communities reignited their search for answers. Some users claimed to have stayed at the resort around the same time in 2016 and shared their own stories. One woman said she remembered seeing a man watching guests from a snowmobile near the tree line, something she thought odd at the time, but hadn't reported. Another post mentioned strange noises coming from the woods at night, including what sounded like a whistle. Theories ranged from the plausible to the bizarre. Some suggested the two had gotten lost and were taken in by someone living off-grid. Others whispered about secret shelters in the mountains, or even people using the terrain to hide from society. But the envelope, the one with the photo, remained the biggest question. Who sent it, and why now? Investigators traced the stamp and postmark to a small town 3 hours away, but hit a dead end after that. No fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance footage from the mailbox. Whoever sent it wanted to remain anonymous. And the photo itself, Emma's face looked calm, not distressed. She was bundled in the same jacket she wore the day she disappeared. Standing beside her, partly turned away, was a smaller figure, likely Lily. But behind them, in the distance, stood a man. Blurry, shadowed, unidentifiable. And just like that, the story took a darker turn. Emma and Lily hadn't simply vanished. They had been seen days after their disappearance. Somewhere in those woods, someone else had been with them. But who he was and what happened after that moment was a mystery still waiting to be uncovered. The weeks following the discovery became a storm of speculation, headlines, and hushed conversations in both local and national circles. Emma and Lily's case was now not just a missing persons story, it had become a mystery with layers no one expected. Investigators were now looking at the possibility that the mother and daughter hadn't simply vanished, but had encountered someone in the wilderness who altered the course of their fate. Who that person was and what role they played still hung in the air like thick fog, refusing to lift. Sheriff Marla Jensen, who'd taken over the county position just a year before the case was reopened, found herself buried in boxes of old evidence. The original investigation files were messy, rushed. Statements were missing timestamps. Several witness interviews hadn't been followed up, but one thing that stood out to her was a name that kept popping up: Tom Ellery. At the time of Emma and Lily's trip, Tom had worked maintenance at the resort, mainly dealing with snowmobiles and trail signs. He wasn't a suspect back then, just one of dozens of employees questioned. But in the margins of a report, someone had noted that he'd gone off shift the same afternoon the mother and daughter disappeared, and hadn't been seen again until the next morning. When asked where he'd been, Tom claimed he'd driven into town for supplies, but there was no receipt or witness to confirm that. Sheriff Jensen paid Tom a visit. He still lived in the area, now a quiet man in his 60s, with a limp and a distrustful look in his eyes. When asked about the Harris case, he didn't say much, just that it had been a tragedy and that he didn't remember much from that weekend. But there was something odd about the way he said it, like he was choosing his words too carefully. Jensen didn't have enough for a warrant. She left with a gut feeling that something about Tom's story didn't sit right. Meanwhile, the recovered photo continued to haunt everyone involved. Forensic analysts tried to enhance the image, hoping to make out the face of the man in the background, but the result was inconclusive. His figure was partially blocked by snow glare, and what little detail could be seen showed a hooded jacket and a faint reflection of light near his chest, possibly a necklace or some kind of badge. But it was enough to suggest he hadn't just stumbled into the frame. He was watching them. Back online, the case had gone viral again. Amateur sleuths on message boards started digging deeper, some even finding old satellite images from the week of the disappearance. One grainy shot showed a small, temporary-looking shelter near the northern side of the forest, not on any map, and gone in later photos. That same area had never been fully searched, partly because it was considered outside the likely radius of travel. But with new interest, teams were sent back in. What they found wasn't the shelter, but signs that something or someone had once been living out there. Broken pieces of tarp, old food cans, a makeshift fire pit, and a notebook with faded water-damaged pages. Most of the writing was illegible, but a few words could still be read: North Trail, Watch, and the name Lily. As this new piece of the puzzle surfaced, another subplot was unfolding quietly. Daniel Brooks, the hiker who had originally discovered the snowsuit, had started receiving anonymous emails. They were brief, just a sentence or two, with no sender. Name. The first one read, "You saw more than you think." The next came 3 days later. "Not everything you found was an accident." Daniel turned them over to the sheriff, but there was no way to trace them. What troubled him more was that the messages referenced things he hadn't shared publicly, like the broken necklace he found near the pine trees and had tucked into his backpack without reporting, thinking it was unrelated. Now he wasn't so sure. He returned it to the authorities immediately, and when tested, the necklace revealed traces of Emma's DNA. Things were starting to unravel, but not in the way anyone expected. Each discovery opened up a new question, and each clue only made the picture murkier. Even the resort's history started to come under review. A former manager who'd worked there in the early 2000s spoke to a reporter and mentioned a string of strange incidents that had occurred in that same forested area. Sightings of a man wandering near the trails at night, gear being stolen, people reporting odd noises. None of it was ever confirmed, but the stories matched some of what was now being uncovered. There had even been a missing persons report filed in 2008 for a solo camper who had vanished after entering the ridge area. His body was never found. His file had been closed after 3 months, labeled presumed exposure death. But now the parallels were difficult to ignore, as pressure mounted on the sheriff's office. Marla Jensen brought in help from outside. A profiler was assigned to the case, someone who had worked missing persons cases involving isolated wilderness crimes. After studying the timeline, photos, recovered items, and original statements, the profiler presented a chilling possibility. What if Emma and Lily hadn't died on the day they vanished? What if someone had been watching them for days, waiting? What if the isolated trail they might have taken wasn't random, but chosen for them? This new theory reframed everything. The map with the drawn symbols, the child's drawing that didn't match Lily's style, the camera photos taken after their last sighting, the figure in the photograph. It painted a story not of 2 people who got lost, but of 2 people who were found by someone else, and yet there was still no clear answer. Every angle had a dead end. Every lead gave just enough to keep hope alive, but not enough to bring closure. Even Tom Ellery had vanished again, leaving his cabin behind one morning with no sign of where he went. His truck was gone, and no phone signals were picked up. The tension was building, not just in the investigation, but in the town itself. Locals were locking their doors at night. The resort quietly reduced its open trails, and bookings dropped as rumors spread. Emma's parents stayed mostly quiet through it all. But in a rare interview, her mother said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. If someone has been hiding this long, they've had help. People like that don't just disappear, they're protected, or they're afraid. And just like that, a new angle began to form. What if this wasn't just about one person? What if the truth about what happened to Emma and Lily wasn't buried in snow or lost in time, but hidden by those who didn't want it found? And if that's the case, then who's still out there watching? The pressure around the case was reaching a boiling point. The entire town felt like it was holding its breath. News vans had returned to the mountain resort, now more quiet and empty than it had been in years. Locals avoided reporters and even their own neighbors. There was a sense of something heavy in the air, like everyone knew something was coming. But no one could guess what Sheriff Jensen barely slept. Every night she went through the files over and over, hoping something she missed would suddenly make sense. The profiler's words echoed in her head. Someone was watching them. Someone waited. It changed the whole timeline. Maybe Emma and Lily didn't just vanish that Sunday afternoon. Maybe they were followed. Maybe they were led. Every new clue made the resort seem less like a peaceful getaway, more like a trap. Then came the phone call that turned everything upside down. It was from a woman who had been hiking in the northern part of the range, closer to the area where the old shelter was seen in the satellite image. She was out walking her dog when she saw something half buried near a tree. At first, she thought it was trash left by campers, but when she brushed the dirt away, she found a small red backpack. The straps were torn, and inside was a children's book, soaked and faded, but with a name still written inside in purple marker: Lily Harris. The sheriff's office moved fast. The site was secured, photographed, and combed for anything else. Behind a thick wall of brush and pine was what looked like a hand-built lean-to shelter. It had clearly been abandoned for years, but what they found inside was chilling. Tucked under a pile of leaves were several small objects: a broken pair of glasses, a crayon drawing of a mountain and a house, and a tiny stuffed animal with a missing button. They also found something else scratched into the inside wood of the shelter wall. Was a word written over and over. Mommy, no human remains were found there, but the message was clear. At some point after they disappeared, Emma and Lily had been here. The items were confirmed by her parents and Emma's sister as belonging to them. The evidence proved something that had only been suspected until Naima and Lily were alive. After they went missing, the question was, for how long? Around the same time, one of the forensic techs made a discovery from the rusted flashlight that had been recovered weeks earlier. It contained a partial fingerprint. It didn't match Emma, Lily, or anyone who had ever worked at the resort. But it did match someone from the area. A name that had quietly come up before Brian Keller. Brian had lived in the woods outside the resort for years. Locals knew him as a drifter, mostly harmless, occasionally doing odd jobs for cash. He'd been interviewed once during the original search in 2016, but was never considered a serious suspect. He had no record, no strong connections to anyone involved, and no reason to be noticed. But now, with his fingerprint tied to one of the key items near the discovery site, things were different. When authorities went to find him, his cabin was empty. The front door was unlocked, and inside, it looked like someone had left in a hurry. Food was still on the counter. A fire still smoldered in the stove. But no sign of Brian. In the corner of the cabin, taped to the wall, was a series of drawings, childlike, messy. Some were of trees and cabins, but others showed stick figures, one large, one small, land, something that looked like a mountain trail. It wasn't hard to see what it represented. There were symbols drawn in the corners, two odd shapes, some matching the strange map found weeks earlier. Whatever Brian had been doing out there, it wasn't just living off the grid. He'd been watching. Maybe worse, the media caught wind of the discovery. The idea that Emma and Lily may have been held somewhere, even for a short time, caused a wave of public outrage and heartbreak. People demanded answers. If Brian Keller had something to do with it, why hadn't he been followed up earlier? Had someone protected him? Or was there another reason his involvement stayed hidden for so long? While the town turned inward and damned Osh, and rumors grew wilder, a new lead came from the most unexpected place on old VHS tape, mailed anonymously to the sheriff's office. No note, no return address, just a single tape marked January. After converting the footage, what played stunned the entire room into silence. The grainy, flickering video showed snow-covered trees and a figure holding a camera, breathing heavily. In the distance, there were two people, one clearly a woman, the other smaller, bundled in red. They weren't speaking. They were walking toward what looked like a shack or cabin. Then the camera zoomed in and quickly cut to black. The footage was too short to identify anyone clearly, but the timestamp matched the weekend Emma and Lily vanished. It confirmed more than anyone was ready for. Someone had been following them. Someone had recorded them. And that someone had waited 7 years to send the proof. Sheriff Jensen knew the case had hit a critical point. The story was no longer just about a disappearance, had become something deeper, something hidden in the community's cracks for too long. Why had this all been allowed to disappear for so many years? Why had multiple people with strange ties to the Castamellery, Brian Keller, been allowed to quietly fade into the background? And then something else surfaced. A retired park ranger came forward after watching the news coverage. He admitted that, years ago, during a winter patrol, he found a campfire site deep in the woods that disturbed him. It wasn't just the location, far from any trail. It was what he found near it, a pair of children's boots, half burnt. He reported it, but was told to drop it. The family doesn't need more theories, his supervisor had said. So he let it go. Until now, that piece of the puzzle fit all too well. Now, everything was building toward a breaking point. Brian Keller was still missing. Tom Ellery hadn't returned. The mountain was being searched again, this time with heat sensors and cadaver dogs. But the longer it took, the more questions rose. Who sent the tape? Who sent the photo? Were they the same person, or were there more people out there hiding truths no one had dared to uncover? The town's silence, the failed early investigation, the missing witnesses, it all pointed to something more. Maybe this wasn't just about one man's twisted secret. Maybe it was about what the town didn't want to see, and with every step deeper into the mountain, it was starting to feel like the truth, whatever it was, wasn't going to come quietly. Just when it felt like the investigation was closing in, everything took an unexpected turn. A second envelope arrived at the sheriff's office, this time not anonymous, but postmarked from a small, isolated town nearly 300 miles away. Inside was a black and white photograph, older than the previous one, and a folded note with just 2 words written in careful block letters. Ask Karen. The photo showed a woman standing at a snowy bus station holding the hand of a young girl. Neither of their faces was visible, but the woman's coat looked eerily similar to the one Emma had worn on the day she disappeared. The child's red boots matched the ones Emma's mother had described buying for Lily just before the trip. The name Karen was a mystery at first. No one in the original case files had that name. It didn't match any lodge employees, family members, or known associates of Emma. But a deeper look into resort guest records uncovered something strange. There was a woman named Karen Doyle who had checked out the morning Emma and Lily went missing. Her name had never come up during the initial investigation because she wasn't interviewed. She had left early, citing a family emergency. That lead exploded everything open again. Sheriff Jensen tracked down Karen, now living under a different last name in Northern Oregon. When she was brought in for questioning, she was hesitant at first, nervous, but not surprised to be contacted. She admitted she remembered Emma and Lily, even shared that she had spoken briefly with them by the fireplace the night before they vanished. Then, as the questions got deeper, her story shifted. She admitted she had seen something else that weakened, something she never told anyone. Karen said she saw Emma talking with a man near the parking lot late at night, long after the lodge had gone quiet. He wasn't wearing resort staff gear and didn't look like a guest. She described him as tall, heavy-set, with a scruffy beard and a dark green parka. Emma didn't seem scared, Karen said, but her body language was tense, protective. Lily stood close beside her, holding onto her coat. Karen watched from her cabin window for less than a minute before the man turned and led them toward the tree line, disappearing into the woods. The next morning, their room was still untouched. Karen had always been unsure of what she saw, and with no one else reporting anything strange, she convinced herself it was a misunderstanding. But now, with the case back in the spotlight and photos resurfacing, she was beginning to doubt everything. Her statement added a chilling detail. The man Emma was seen with matched the rough appearance of Brian Keller, but she also said he wasn't alone. There was a second person with him, standing farther back, smoking a cigarette. Karen never saw his face, just the glow of the cigarette and a long coat swaying in the wind. This new account cracked the case wide open. Again, if Brian wasn't working alone, then there was a second figure hidden in the shadows this whole time, someone no one had ever looked for. The idea that Emma and Lily may have been led away willingly or under pressure raised more questions than it answered. Was Emma trying to protect her daughter by going with them? Was she threatened? And if they were being watched days before they vanished, who else knew? As the news broke about Karen's statement, another shock hit the investigation. A man named Alan Pierce came forward. He was a former staff member at the resort, but had left abruptly the year after the disappearance. At the time, he said it was due to burnout, but now, with everything resurfacing, he admitted there was more to it. Alan claimed that in the days following the disappearance, he found something buried behind the snowmobile shed, a metal box filled with old photographs, notes, and what looked like homemade maps. When he showed it to his supervisor, he was told to forget it. He never saw the box again. Now, years later, Alan still remembered one of the photos clearly. It was of Emma tacked from a distance, through the trees, as she walked with Lily toward one of the side trails. That detail changed everything. If those photos existed and someone had been following Emma during her stay, it meant the plan to intercept them wasn't random, it was calculated. The shelter, the drawings, the symbols, it all pointed to something organized. Someone had been tracking them. Someone had planned this, and now, with the discovery of a possible second person involved, theories were spiraling. The town's history was re-examined. Old missing persons cases were pulled from archives. 2 more names surfaced, both hikers who had gone missing in the same area years before, both unsolved, both dismissed as accidents. But now, the similarities were too hard to ignore. Each case involved people traveling alone or with children. Each happened in winter. Each left behind almost no trace. Suddenly, Emma and Lily weren't just an isolated tragedy. They were possibly part of a pattern, as the sheriff's team rushed to re-interview surviving staff and anyone who had worked in or near White Pine Ridge during those years. A shocking revelation came from a long-retired dispatcher. She remembered a call from that night in 2016, a young girl's voice. Faint, scared. The call didn't last more than 10 seconds, just static, muffled words, and a sob. The recording was never saved, logged only as incomplete. No one followed up, assuming it was a misdial or prank. But now, with Lily's belongings confirmed at the shelter, and that voice in the back of their minds, it all pointed to one terrifying truth. Mum and Lily had tried to call for help, and no one had heard them. With each new lead, the stakes kept rising. The second person in the woods. The box of photographs. The confirmed sighting of Emma walking away from the lodge. None of it pointed toward a random tragedy. It suggested something deeper, something that had been quietly operating in the shadows of that peaceful mountain resort. Sheriff Jensen knew time was running out. Brian Keller was still missing. Tom Ellery hadn't been found. And someone, possibly more than one person, was out there, still holding the rest of the story. And then came the final blow before everything would change. A new video clip surfaced, posted anonymously online. It was short, blurry, taken from what looked like an old flip phone. The camera was shaking, but the voice was unmistakable. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, whispering, "Mom, someone's outside the window." Then silence. The clip ended in static. It hadn't been posted to gain attention. It hadn't gone viral. It was hidden on a dark message board, only discovered because one user was digging through old forums about the case. But it confirmed something everyone feared and no one could prove. Ma and Lily had been watched. Not once, not twice, but over days, maybe longer. And whoever had filmed them might still be watching. The final push began just as the first snow of the season started to fall again. After weeks of scattered clues, false leads, and quiet dread building in the community, Sheriff Jensen received a phone call from a forestry worker assigned to a controlled burn near the outer edge of White Pine Ridge, deep in the woods, past the old maintenance road and a dry creek bed. The crew stumbled upon something hidden under layers of moss and brush, a rusted hatch built into the ground, almost invisible if not for the faint metallic glint in the fading light. It wasn't marked on any map, and it clearly hadn't been used in years. The sheriff called in backup and approached carefully. When they pried open the hatch, a heavy, musty air poured out from below. Steps led into darkness. The team descended with flashlights, unsure of what they were walking into. What they found was a small underground room, roughly the size of a shed. With old furniture, a rotting mattress, broken picture frames, and torn pages of children's books littering the floor. And scrawled across one wall in faded marker was the word SAFE repeated. Again and again, it was a makeshift shelter not meant to last. But someone had lived there. Someone had survived. In the corner was an old backpack, the same model as the one Lily had carried. Inside were melted crayons, a cracked music player, and a set of drawings. One of them was unmistakably a mother and daughter, holding hands with a large mountain behind them and a man drawn in black ink, standing apart. But the discovery didn't end there. Hidden beneath a loose wooden board was a metal box sealed with duct tape. Inside it were several videotapes, one of which was labeled with a single name, Lily. Investigators worked overnight to convert the footage. What played shocked everyone. The video showed Emma, visibly tired but alert, speaking directly into the camera. "If someone finds this," she said, her voice cracking, "we've been here for 5 days. He won't let us go. He says no one is looking anymore." She paused, then turned the camera toward a dim-lit corner where Lily was curled up, holding her stuffed animal. "She's scared, but we're still alive." Emma's message was dated for days after they were last seen. The room matched the underground shelter exactly. It confirmed everything the mother and daughter had been held there. But what the video also showed, near the end, changed everything. A man entered the frame, only briefly. His face wasn't visible, but his voice was captured as he barked orders. What shocked investigators wasn't just the tone, but the name he spoke. He called the girl Ellie, not Lily. That mistake led to a breakthrough. In old resort records from nearly a decade earlier, Sheriff Jensen found a guest record for a man named Gregory Hale, who had stayed under the alias Thomas Ellery. He traveled with a daughter named Ellie. 2 weeks after his stay, Ellie was reported missing. But that case had been filed in another state and was never linked. The more Jensen dug, the darker it got. Gregory Hale had used multiple identities and had vanished after his daughter's disappearance, never investigated for her case. His background showed patterns of unstable behavior, wandering between remote towns, often living off-grid. He had no criminal record, just gaps, large, unexplained periods of time. Now, it was clear. Emma and Lily's disappearance wasn't random. Gregory Hale had likely mistaken Lily for his missing daughter, Ellie. He had fixated on them at the resort, convinced himself of something that wasn't real. When Emma resisted or tried to escape, he hid them, isolated them. The recordings, the strange maps, the markings, they were all part of his disoriented attempt to reconstruct a broken past. Hale's obsession had turned into a dangerous delusion. The sheriff issued a statewide alert. Within 48 hours, Hale was found living under another false name in a quiet trailer community 2 towns over. When authorities surrounded his home, he didn't resist. Inside, they found more drawings, more maps. One wall was covered in photos of families at ski resorts. Some dated back 10 years, but the twist that stunned everyone came during Hale's interrogation. While reviewing his recovered belongings, investigators found a key, a strange, heavy one that didn't match anything found in the shelter. They brought Hale in again, and this time he finally spoke. "There's another place," he mumbled, his voice distant. "The other girl, she stayed there." They followed the lead, using the key to open an old forgotten ranger station deep in the woods. It had long been decommissioned. What they found inside was devastating. Remnants of another child's belongings. The girl who had gone missing 10 years earlier. Her case had been closed as a runaway. But here, at last, was the truth. Gregory Hale had done this before. And here's where the twist came full circle. In a final envelope, sent anonymously once more to the sheriff, was a photo. This time, it wasn't Emma or Lily. It was a teenage girl standing outside a library. The back of the photo was labeled with a name, Ellie Hale -2020. The date was, for years after her presumed death, a fingerprint test on the photo confirmed it. Ellie had survived. She had escaped and had remained in hiding, watching, possibly even sending the evidence that reopened Emma and Lily's case. Ellie had been the one sending the photos, the tapes, the map. She had never stopped trying to expose the man who took her, but she was afraid to come forward. She had seen what he was capable of, and when Emma and Lily vanished, she realized he had done it again. So she started leaving clues, slowly, quietly, waiting for someone to connect them. It wasn't just Emma who had fought to save her daughter. Ellie had been fighting too from the outside, in her own way, as Gregory Hale was formally charged and the pieces finally fell into place. The town exhaled for the first time in years. Emma and Lily's story had been one of heartbreak, but also of resilience, courage, and determination. They hadn't disappeared into the mountain. They had fought to be seen, and through a trail of fragile clues and quiet bravery, they were finally heard. But the image of Ellie's photo, her face older, different, watching from afar left a final lingering question: where was she now? And would she ever step out of the shadows? Because some stories don't end with justice. They end with someone still watching, still waiting, still deciding if the world is safe enough to come home. In the days that followed Gregory Hale's arrest, the mountain finally began to feel quiet again. Not just in the physical sense, but in the way people carried themselves, like a weight had finally lifted. The cold mystery that had hung over White Pine Ridge for 7 long years was no longer a shadow, but a story with names, faces, and hard truths. Sheriff Jensen held a press conference to confirm what had long been feared and recently discovered. Emma and Lily had been taken, hidden, and silenced by a man lost in his own twisted past. But they had not disappeared without a fight. Their strength and will to survive left behind a trail that, piece by piece, helped unravel everything. The underground shelter where they'd been held was carefully dismantled. Investigators collected every shred of material for forensic review, while a memorial was placed nearby, a simple plaque with their names and the words "never forgotten, always found." Emma's family chose not to speak much publicly, but her father released a quiet statement thanking the community, law enforcement, and the anonymous figure who kept the case alive. He said Emma would have done the same for someone else, and that Lily's spirit would live on in every child who plays in the snow without fear. But the story didn't end there. The photo of Ellie Hale had sparked a renewed search, not by the authorities, but by people across the country who felt connected to the case. News outlets picked up the thread, digging deeper into the years following her disappearance. And slowly, more information surfaced. A social worker in Nevada came forward, saying she remembered a quiet teen who came through a shelter system under a fake name in 2021. She had no ID, avoided photos, and left after just 3 days. The shelter had a policy of letting older teens move on if they didn't break rules, and no one had any reason to stop her. But the woman remembered her drawing constantly mountains, cabins, trees. When shown a copy of Ellie's childhood artwork, she nodded slowly. "That's her," she said. "I never forgot those drawings." Whether Ellie wanted to be found remained unclear, but her silent efforts had changed everything. Without her clues to the photos, the video, the marked map, no one would have known where to look. She had taken a risk, a big one, to speak without being seen. Some believed she might reveal herself now that Hale was no longer a threat. Others felt she had already said what she needed to say. Either way, her courage echoed far beyond the forest that had once trapped her. Daniel Brooks, the hiker who'd found the first red piece of fabric, stayed in touch with the sheriff's office. Throughout the process, for a long time, He said he had nightmares about that day in the woods. He felt guilty for not knowing what he'd stumbled upon sooner. But Sheriff Jensen reminded him that without his call, none of the pieces would have started to fit. His simple choice to stop, to report what seemed like nothing, had set everything in motion. One small act that changed the course of an entire investigation. And then there was Karen, the woman who came forward years later with the memory of seeing Emma and Lily walking into the woods. She had carried guilt for keeping that moment to herself, but her decision to speak up when it mattered helped close the case. She chose to testify against Gregory Hale, offering her witness statement to ensure the full story was told. In the end, her voice became one of many that brought the truth into the light. The town of White Pine Ridge quietly honored Emma and Lily with a memorial trail. It was a short loop through a peaceful part of the forest marked with hand-painted signs created by local children. The trail was named Lily's Path, and along it were benches carved with quotes about courage, motherhood, and hope. For visitors, it became a place to reflect not just on the case, but on the resilience people carry in the face of fear. The resort itself slowly reopened its closed trails, with new safety measures and emergency markers installed. Staff underwent training, and a portion of all lodge bookings was redirected to support missing persons programs and trauma recovery for survivors. People in the town agreed if anything good could come from what happened, it would be the lessons. They all carried forward as the final pieces fell into place. One mystery still hovered. Where was Ellie now? Had she returned to a normal life somewhere under a new name, blending into a world she once hid from? Or was she still out there, quietly watching, making sure her message had been heard? No one could say for sure. But in the quiet corners of online forums and community groups, her name remained a symbol of strength, the girl who escaped, the girl who spoke without speaking, the girl who helped bring another family home, even if her own story remained unfinished. Years later, a woman walked into a library in Oregon and left a small sketchbook at the front desk. No name, no note, just a drawing inside the cover. It showed a mountain, two stick figures holding hands, and a third standing apart, watching with a soft smile. Beneath the drawing were three simple words: I remember everything. Whether that was truly Ellie or someone else honoring her legacy, no one ever confirmed, but the message stayed. A reminder that in every missing story, there's a person behind it. And sometimes, even when all seems lost, hope survives in the quiet actions of those who refuse to be forgotten. The story of Emma and Silly began with a vacation and ended with a community changed forever. It taught people to look closer, to speak up, to remember that the smallest details matter. It proved that silence can be broken, even years later. And that truth doesn't always come quickly, but it does come, one step at a time. And as the snow continued to fall over White Pine Ridge, the mountains stood quiet again, not because the story was forgotten, but because this time it had finally been heard.